I feel greatly distressed and weep bitter tears.
Livingstone had paid a high price for his beliefs, and his grief would not end with the death of his wife. He had set out to civilize Africa through commerce. But back in England, popular enthusiasm for his exploits was generating a new hunger for conquest. Livingstone's expedition had failed. Disease had caused the deaths of 12 of his companions, and none of his objectives was attained. Livingstone was recalled by the British government and returned home to face scathing attacks in the press.
We were promised cotton, sugar, indigo, and we got none. We were promised trade, and there is no trade. We were promised converts, and not one has been made. In a word, thousands subscribed by the universities and contributed by the government have been productive of the most fatal results.
Disraeli agreed with every word, and he soon seized the chance to promote his own vision of empire. When he won the next election, the Queen greeted his victory with delight.
I saw Mr. Disraeli at 2:45 today. He knelt down and kissed hands, saying, "I plight my troth to the kindest of mistresses."
The silver-tongued charmer was back in office. As he had once confided to a friend,
"You have heard me called a flatterer, and it is true. Everyone likes flattery, and when you come to royalty, you should lay it on with a trowel."
Disraeli always loved the company of women, and he was very good at flattering women. And I think with Queen Victoria, he was able to see that she was lonely. And Disraeli was able to charm her and to flatter her. And I think very importantly, one of the things that Disraeli did was to encourage her to take a far more active role in public affairs. So the result of this was that basically he had Queen Victoria as an ally, particularly when he was Prime Minister. And this was absolutely crucial, I think, to the success of Disraeli's ministry, that the monarchy was behind it.
Disraeli set out to increase Britain's prestige and expand Victoria's empire. And within a year of taking office, fate dealt him a brilliant opportunity. Just 5 years before, the Suez Canal had been carved through the Egyptian desert. It permitted ocean-going ships to pass between the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, linking Europe and the East. For Britain, it was the lifeline to her greatest imperial possession. India, with 400 million people, was the largest overseas territory any empire has ever owned. The Queen called it the most precious jewel in her crown, and Disraeli feared that a rival power would cut the new imperial artery.
The Suez Canal was absolutely crucial to Britain's empire. Suez was the jugular vein, if you like, of the British Empire. It was through the Suez Canal that the route to India, the short route to India, which was so strategically important, happened. So for Disraeli, it was very important, and he was quite right in this, I think, that Britain should have a controlling influence over the Suez Canal.
The shares in the Suez Canal Company were owned by a number of French investors and the ruler of Egypt, the Khedive. The Khedive had spent Egypt's wealth on palaces, museums, and railways. Now he was deep in debt to banks in London and Paris. The canal showed no prospect of paying a dividend for years, and he desperately needed funds. In 1875, he made a secret offer to the British. Disraeli wrote urgently to the Queen.
"Mr. Disraeli, with his humble duty to your Majesty, The Khedive, on the eve of bankruptcy, appears desirous of parting with his shares in the Suez Canal and has communicated confidentially. It is an affair of millions, about 4 at least, but it is vital to Your Majesty's authority and power at this critical moment that the canal should belong to England. The Khedive now says that it is absolutely necessary that he should have between 3 and 4 million sterling by the 30th of this month. Scarcely a breathing time, but the thing must be done.
The Queen replied by telegram the following day, approving his course of action, but fearing that it would be difficult to arrange. Normally, Parliament could have granted a government loan, but Parliament was not in session, and a French consortium had already bid for the shares. Disraeli sent his private secretary to seek help from an old friend. Baron Rothschild was the head of the great banking family and one of the richest men in the world. The secretary explained that Disraeli needed £4 million, the price of the Khedive shares in the Suez Canal. "When?" asked Rothschild. "By tomorrow," answered the secretary. Rothschild picked up a grape, spat out the pits, and said, "What is your security?" "The British government," was the reply. "You shall have it," said the Baron. Disraeli wrote to the Queen in triumph,
"It is just settled. You have it, madam. The French government has been outgeneraled, and the entire interest of the Khedive is now yours."
The Queen was delighted. Disraeli treated her not only as his monarch, but as a woman, and a woman of intelligence. When the canal deal was done, she wrote in her journal,
Complete security for India. An immense thing. Mr. Disraeli said that my support had been a great help. His mind is so much greater, and his apprehension of things great and small so much quicker than that of Mr. Gladstone.
Gladstone was strongly opposed to the deal because he thought it would draw Britain into new imperial commitments. He was right. The Suez Canal was to drag the British deeper and deeper into the murky politics of the Middle East. The overlords of the entire region were the Turks, but many of their subject peoples were rising against them. Faced with rebellion on all sides, the Turks resorted to mass slaughter. Russia backed the rebels, and Disraeli feared that the Turkish Empire would collapse and open the way for the Russians to advance on the Suez Canal. However badly they treated their subjects, Disraeli thought Britain had to support the Turks. But Gladstone thought otherwise. He was no longer the leader of the Liberals. He had retired to his country estate where he relaxed by chopping trees and setting down his thoughts on God. But he was appalled by stories of Turkish atrocities against their Christian subjects. He thought the corrupt and crumbling Turkish Empire should be brought to an end. He laid down his axe, and he took up his pen.
There is not a cannibal in the South Sea Islands whose indignation would not arise and overboil at the recital of what has been done. Let the Turks now carry away their abuses in the only possible manner, namely by carrying off themselves. This thorough riddance, this most blessed deliverance, is the only reparation we can make to the memory of those heaps and heaps of dead, to the violated purity alike of matrons, maiden, and of child.
Disraeli called the style of Gladstone's protest vulgar, remarking that of all the atrocities, Gladstone's writings were probably the worst. But Gladstone had caught the public mood, and in the House of Commons, Disraeli was forced to choose his words with more care.
Our duty at this critical moment is to maintain the Empire of England, nor will we agree to any step, though it may obtain for a moment comparative quiet and a false prosperity, that hazards the existence of empire.
Disraeli backed his words with action. As the Russians advanced on the Turkish capital, he dispatched a British fleet, led by the most powerful battleship in the world, HMS Devastation. Public opinion swung to Disraeli's side. War fever spread through the pubs and music halls of Britain. The British may not have liked what the Turks were doing to their Christian subjects, but they shared Disraeli's determination to stop the Russians.
Most ordinary British people see Russia as an antithesis of Britain. Here is Britain, progressive and enlightened. There is Russia, ignorant, backward, ruled by a despot, with most of its population in abject slavery as serfs. So there was a sort of great deal of Russophobia in Britain. Russia was just disliked as an odious country.
Fearful of war with Britain, the Russians agreed to negotiate. Disraeli set off to attend peace talks. He returned in triumph. His diplomacy had forced the Russians to halt their advance on the Middle East. The lifeline to India was secured. Victoria shared the public rejoicing and decided it was the right moment to claim what she considered to be long overdue.
In common conversation, I am sometimes called Empress of India. Why have I never officially assumed this title? I feel I ought to do so, and wish to have preliminary inquiries made.
Disraeli introduced a bill in Parliament to bestow on Victoria the title Queen Empress of India. Gladstone led the opposition, calling the move
theatrical bombast and folly.
But the title was granted and the Queen was delighted. She expressed her gratitude by making Disraeli an earl.
She was deeply grateful to Disraeli for this. It was, if you like, embellishing the British monarchy, and at the same time the Queen is given a new sense of responsibility. She is deeply interested in India. Immediately she is made empress. She sets out to learn Hindustani. It doesn't make much headway, but there's a lot of goodwill there. And she also hires Indian servants.
Various Maharajas sent her jewelry to adorn her as Empress of India. And on a New Year's Day, I believe, in 1876, she put on some of the jewelry, which didn't go with her bulky build. And Disraeli was there and admired them, and she said, do you want to see the rest of them that I'm not wearing? And of course he had to say yes. And she brought out boxes of jewels, which represented what India meant to her.
Between them, the Queen Empress and her newly ennobled Prime Minister appealed to an imperial spirit that was spreading through large sections of the British public. An aggressive spirit, flexing British muscle and lording it over the world. Gladstone continued to oppose it. He called it
showy imperialism.
Even Disraeli's own foreign secretary wrote privately of his concerns.
Disraeli believes thoroughly in prestige and would think it in the interests of the country to spend 200 millions on a war if the result was to make foreign states think more highly of us.
The Queen backed Disraeli to the hilt.
If we are to maintain our position as a first-rate power, we must, with our Indian empire and large colonies, be prepared for attacks and wars somewhere or other continually.
But the strain of this imperialist policy was beginning to show.